Hello, my name is Christian Calleros, and my topic is on the Boston Tea Party. The Boston Tea Party occurred on December 16, 1773. It was a protest planned by the American colonists and more specifically groups like the Sons of Liberty. During this time, the British were imposing many acts like the Townshend Act, the Sugar Act, and the Stamp Act. And all of these acts were put in place without the representation of the colonies, and this led to major issues with the colonies as they were forced to pay these extra taxes and extra fees for simple necessities such as sugar and paper and stamps and glass, lead, and paint, and they're forced to pay these extra taxes and fees just to import them from areas that like Great Britain or China, and they were forced to pay these fees without having representation in the British Parliament. This led to the eventual protest of the Boston Tea Party. Basically, what happened was that three ships carrying all the ships were carrying tea. They went into the harbor, and they were boarded overnight by colonists dressed as Native Americans. And these colonists ended up throwing off all the tea into the Boston Harbor. They ended up throwing over 342 chests overboard and caused around $1.7 million in damage and lost revenue. This deeply angered Great Britain as the tea came from China and was previously bought by Great Britain to be sent to the colonies and to be sent throughout Britain. And the colonies did not end up paying for this tea, and they just threw it overboard. This event actually caused the British Parliament to enact the Intolerable Act in 1774, and this included the closing of the Boston Harbor. So they restricted all trade and did not allow like any trade or smuggling to occur. And they ended up restricting the Massachusetts government power. And they took out most of the politicians that had power in Massachusetts, and they replaced them with British politicians that were more closely related to the crown, and they required colonists to house British troops. And these acts enraged the colonists, who united to form the First Continental Congress in response and significantly escalated tensions. The new government of Massachusetts ended up severely limiting the self governance of the area, and instead of votings being held to elect new politicians into power, these officials are actually appointed instead by the crown, and this also gave them the power to accuse anyone of like crimes against Britain, and these crimes were actually tried in Britain rather than Massachusetts. This overall gave the crown more power over the colonies, and especially on Massachusetts due to their rioting and or their protesting. This eventually paved the road to revolution as the colonists began to form colonial militias and actually ended up taking over Lexington and Concord and taking British troops as like hostages, which enraged Britain and ended up causing the whole Civil War. Revolution. Personally, I believe that the Boston Tea Party was justified, as the colonists were not only doing this like to go against the British for taxation without representation, but they also believed that the Tea Act of 1773 was actually granting a monopoly to the British East India Company, and this ended up limiting the amount of tea that like the colonists could bring into the colonies and that they could import, and ended up leading to a lot of smuggling. And they felt that the crown was like abusing their power, as they believed that they did not have a right to tax the colonies without their consent. While this event did damage property and did target the East Indian Company, which didn't really have anything to do with this other than like actually providing the tea, I believe this event was necessary to U.S. history and to the colonies as a whole, as it was the only way that they were going to get the attention of the British like Parliament and government as a whole, due to the lack of representation and the lack of communication between them. I also believe this event to be necessary and like super important to U.S. history, as the way that the British Parliament reacted by passing the intolerable acts ended up leading to the American Revolution, and showed that, like, how corrupt the British Parliament was, and showed that there was not going to be any change unless the British colonies took the drastic measures, which they did by taking Lexington and Concord. So I believe that if it wasn't for the Boston Tea Party, the revolution may have never occurred, and if it did, chances are it wouldn't have been as successful as it was, like then when it occurred, due to the way that the British Parliament responded, and passed like the Intolerable Acts, and passed the Quartering Act, and passed more acts that restricted the power of the colonies. So overall, I think that the Boston Tea Party was extremely important, and it was justified due to the way that the British Parliament was acting and the way that they reacted to the event. Thank you.